How many people here, I'm just curious, and I know we've all been doing the show of hands thing, but how many people here have a visceral dread of a ringing phone? Yeah, as Cheslock would say, let's talk about it. Because I'm not on call right now. More about that in a minute. Oh, I'm not supposed to walk over there. Not on call right now, but for those of you who don't know me, this is the traditional second slide. Bridget Kromhout. I spent way too long in ops. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We run our DevOps days in the 1 month every year that it does not snow, which is July. But we are running it the week before the DevOps Days Portland. And I do run the shadowy cabal that runs DevOps Days. And the DevOps Days Portland people here, talk to Bill, talk to Alice. Their tickets are available now. Their DevOps Days is August 1st and 2nd, so you probably want to go to that. And I work at Pivotal. I do tech advocacy for Cloud Foundry. And I also podcast with Arrested DevOps. So if you're thinking, oh, that's why that voice sounds familiar, I am the disembodied voice asking people questions about ops, inside your podcast machine, probably Overcast. It seems like more and more of our listeners are using Overcast. Okay, but I did spend an ungodly amount of time on call for production. I went and actually added it up, and I was on call for production from 1999 until August 2015, which I think broke me in a deep way because now I report up through marketing. And I think, by the way, when Andrew Clay Schaefer says, come with me if you want to live, it'll be fun, you won't be on call anymore. What he doesn't tell you about is the 3 a.m. flights out of Bangalore. You'll still not get sleep. It's just for different reasons. But the part where you have all the feels about on-call, even if you're not on it anymore, is, I suppose, means it took me this long. It took me almost 2 years to actually be able to do a talk about on-call. I had set aside enough of the on-call PTSD. It's never going to be gone. I will never turn the alerts on my phone back on. People message me on Twitter. I'm like, oh, I'm going to see that when I look eventually, but I don't have alerts on my phone. But I do think that change is the only constant. And I went and walked, I have spoken at Monitorama before in 2014. I went and watched the video of that because I didn't want to repeat myself too much. Oh, it was a more innocent time. I still had AV disasters, but other than that, it was a more innocent time because the main things we seemed to all be worried about were the global write lock in MongoDB and, airport carpet. We weren't as concerned about, the dissolution of the global whatever, but we had, I think looking at that talk, I was talking about from zero to visibility or observability or something like that, probably visibility. I feel like I'm now saying Charity's observability word constantly, but I was thinking, how do we get from the, hey, we're talking about these specific tools that we want to use for the stuff we care about, to maybe taking that conversation to a slightly different place. Okay, we have, and here in the last day, we've experienced hey, there are going to be disasters. This shouldn't be a surprise to us anymore in any way. And yet, I work at a vendor now, I go in and talk to all sorts of customers, and everybody wants to talk about the ideal thing that they think is going to happen. And I'm like, reality check. Look at this tweet of Cheslock's. That was a delightful picture of the Portland skyline yesterday. It's this is the realities that we're actually all living under. So planning for that is where I think most of the people in this room are. This was Laura Bell gave a really good talk at the Agile conference in Boston earlier this year. And it reminded me of how, I kind of have this, if you pay attention to Simon Wardley's Pioneers, Settlers, Town Planners thing, where pioneers are, pioneering, but the idea of settlers is okay, we've got this proof of concept, and now we're going to try to scale it up. Now we're going to try to actually operate this with maybe some actual customers on it. And I think the world spends a lot of time valuing and celebrating the efforts of people who, instantiate something new and not who stabilize something that is in theory great and they make it great in practice. And so I wanna make sure we celebrate that. And I know that this room is obviously full of people who are thinking about that. I know that Jesse Frizzell's Monitorama conference also kind of focuses on like, hey, maintaining things also matters. So a little bit of a digression into, previously on ops life. My last ops gig was for a streaming video site. And you're thinking like, wait, didn't you work at some sort of ad tech firm? And yes, I did. They got acquired. And this is a thing that happens, apparently. They got acquired, and I went to go work for a firm that a friend of mine was at, remoting to this little company that was very much like Netflix, if Netflix were much smaller and mostly Korean soap opera, and ran Docker in production starting in October 2013, when I'm pretty sure the main thing on Docker's website was like, under no circumstances should you run this in production. And we were like, YOLO. And they eventually got acquired by Warner Brothers, so I guess, sometimes YOLO works out. Not saying you should just YOLO things into production, but because somebody's on call for that. But like what I learned there is that it's not just the we have this stuff that we're trying to monitor, we're trying to keep it up, we're trying to scale it out, and that's not the only stuff that matters, because the communication across the team, and you might be thinking like, oh, it was a 5-person ops team and a 100-person company. Like, how much communication trouble could there be? I was like, well, were there more than 2 humans there? Yes. It's like, yes. If there were 2 humans there, there were probably going to be communication issues, right? And like this idea of bringing everything to microservices, and that is in fact what we were doing. We were doing that really fun thing where you, if you're a Python Django shop and it's 2014, you start decomposing everything and rewriting them in Golang microservices, because that was the style at the time, I guess. And what we started doing there is trying to figure out how we could make sure we were getting the right observability, like make sure we were going to be alerted correctly, make sure that we weren't going to just burn people out on being paged constantly on all the things, which is obviously a really typical pattern that I think we all fall into. And this is one of those places where we definitely had like the divide between dev and ops in terms of who was on call, and it didn't necessarily map to who understood the systems the best. I'm going to call Ryan out because he's out there in the audience somewhere. I see a wave, a little hand from way in the back. I think he's probably sitting on the floor by the back wall. There you go. And when we've got people where like I might be the ops person on call, I get paged, I'm trying to figure out what the hell's going on, and this developer understands what's going on better than I do. Like, that's great, for your cross-team collaboration, but that's not necessarily something that your architecture is going to give you, right? Like, you can get that from good communication amongst, between team members, between teams. You're not necessarily going to get that from, say, documentation. So it's like, oh, great, it's 3 a.m. and I'm now going to read a document. Yeah, like, really? No. Okay, so basically, I do want to believe that decomposing everything, I mean, we're in Portland, right? So like decomposing everything into, like super trendy microservices and going with, the sleek modern architecture of everything, I want to believe that that will make things better in terms of, ops life and when people and how people get paged and that sort of thing. But the reality is that it's never going to be that simple, and we've had a lot of talks at this conference about a lot of really great tools, but in many cases, the tools are not going to, cause us or encourage us even really to have the kind of culture that lets us be better. And I know I found Alice's talk really moving because I had a great deal of, on-call stress in my life, obviously, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the kinds of patterns of communication across an organization that I've seen work well or not well. But just that individual impact on people on your team, like I would challenge everyone to think about what the on-calls are like inside your team. And if you have to say to yourself, like, yeah, I can't recommend that people do this. I can't recommend that people join our team. Like, I have a friend who would love to join this team, and if they're gonna join and the on-call is going to make their lives complete shit, like, would you actually recommend that to them? And I think that's something we all have to think about inside our orgs. And this is, I assume this tweet probably has even more tweets. Sorry about your battery, or I assume you turned all your notifications off on Twitter by now, Pete. But this tweet I think really resonated with people. And if you can't read it, it says that what Pete said in his Vasa talk yesterday: 2 types of ops. People who have fucked up production, and people who will fuck up production. And I had somebody wanting to argue with me on Twitter saying like, oh no, that's devs who do that. And I'm like thinking to myself, it's all of us. I mean, you might have different gates inside your organization about who can press that go button. Maybe you have a really automated deploy pipeline and like someone in charge of product is the one who actually makes the go, no-go call. But trying to pick a person and saying they're the ones who made it all break is like, really? You're gonna have to go back and read more stuff from John Allspaw, who J. Paul Reed was referring to in the recent talk, because it's like, blaming people is not going to actually solve the problem faster. Because I don't know about you, but like when I've felt responsible for an outage and also been worried that maybe I wouldn't have a job because of the outage, that was not a strongly motivating factor for me to be forthcoming about it. And when I went into work that morning and was like, yeah, I fucked up. And my boss is like, it's okay. I'm like, really? I'm like, do I still work here? He's like, yeah, you definitely still work here. Let's fix this. Okay, and yeah, of course, we always have to talk about DNS, right? And it's like, I feel like we can focus on those specific things that maybe are always broken, or those things that may or may not be what we want to point to, what we want to blame, what we want to say. This is the thing I always check first, because I touched the stove once and it was hot, and now I always check that. That's like, I mean, yeah, like we know that there are some things in our infrastructure, everywhere that you work, if you have any kind of operational responsibilities or architectural responsibilities, or if you wrote some code once that you kind of regretted, but the test passed, and you shipped it because, it was Friday and you wanted to go home. Like, all of us have something like that, where it's like, we know that there's the stuff we probably should go look at that's probably wrong in our infrastructure. It's like, yeah, I'm giving you all sorts of homework. That's another thing to do when you get back. Just go look at that thing that has always bugged you. I mean, like, we had, I think I showed you when I was here in 2014, I think I showed you the outage that we had over shopping holiday because we were on the front page of a major American toy retailer, and there was, MongoDB and sadness. And I did know that there was something a little bit sketchy about it, and I kind of brought it up and I kind of wanted to change it, but there was a change freeze because shopping holiday, and so we didn't. And I mean, we did change it on Cyber Monday when it was down, and it's like, you have stuff like that. Just fix it now before it makes you really sad. Okay, and also, like, I have, there are some cat pictures. Sorry, not sorry, but I think that there's a lot of places where people get, hyped up or excited about, we might be able to just get rid of all this. I mean, we can have some serverless and some no ops, and we don't even need to have or be or do or whatever ops anymore. And being on call, it's terrible. And why don't we just have cross-functional teams and nobody ever has to be sad? And it's like, this all sounds great, except for the fact that there are still servers somewhere. Like, maybe you can't SSH into them, but they still exist. And so you still have to care about how you're architecting your applications. And it's like, it's kind of a reality check thing. Like, if and yes, Attack Kitten did grow up a little bit. Like, he's still really small, but apparently they get bigger if you feed them. Who knew? And if you think about like which stuff is paging you, and which decisions like you probably as an organization want to revisit, like those are the places it gets really hard to have that discussion because it may not be about getting the new feature out. I mean, hey, features, they're great. Let's just keep shipping features. It doesn't matter if they're broken. Somebody can just be miserable. Yeah, this is not a sustainable plan. You're going to burn people out. You're going to have very angry attack kittens if you do that. Okay, so something else like I would point out is that we do need that empathy that we sometimes talk about, in that whole, DevOpsy woo thing, like the understanding the problems of someone else, even if they are not exactly your problems. Just saying you should learn JavaScript and you should learn HDFS and feel each other's pain, like that may or may not actually solve the problems inside your organization. It might, but it very well might not. Just depending on people's perspectives, their skills, like what they're coming into this with. And by the way, in the CERN presentation, I was like, HDFS, I remember that. I remember a lot of problems with that. You should probably never run, you shouldn't run HBase on EMR, by the way. Like AWS calls them job flows for a reason. They expect them to be ephemeral. Pro tip. Okay, and this is working. Okay, so like I mentioned, I work for Andrew Clay Schaefer at Pivotal. And he likes to say that like most of tech is tribalism in fashion. And I think he's right. And I also think that we end up focusing a lot on that stuff that either the things that seems like we can affect or the things that seem easy to change. Like we can definitely add a new technology to our stack, right? Like I don't know about you, but I assume we can probably read about something on the front page of Hacker News and YOLO it out into production, and it will definitely be fine. It's probably fine. Cheslak, right? No? But I think that it's very easy to get caught up in hype-driven development because this stuff is exciting. And I don't know about you, but I definitely want to develop a novel time series database and like get that out to production because it'll be great. Except like, what problem are you trying to solve? And what are you making better or way, way worse inside your organization? I think is worth thinking about with that. And this is like, again, back to the, the serverless thing that I mentioned before. This is actually funny. I was prepping for a panel that I was doing at Velocity New York last year with Charity Majors, actually, and a couple of other great people. And I don't know if you can read that. Well, you probably can't read the suggestion. It's funny. Keynote suggested, instead of serverless, it suggested servers. And I was like, you're not wrong, Keynote. It's like, there are definitely servers there. And we're always going to pick a level of abstraction that matters for our organization and a level of abstraction that we're personally going to work in and care about. Like, I like OPSI things, and I'm kind of baffled by CSS. And when we're working, on the DevOps Days website, like, I'll be playing with Hugo and the static site generator and whatnot, and then, I can write some janky bash to do a bunch of stuff, and then I'm looking at the CSS. I'm like, Stratton? It's not that I couldn't learn it. I'm just not motivated enough, And there's some place that a lot of us maybe aren't racking and stacking servers anymore. And like, that's probably fine. It might make sense for your organization if you're high-frequency traders, and it makes sense for you to put some servers strategically located in the cage right at the colo, right next to the people that you're like, trying to trade with or partner with or beat on those trade games or whatever. Yeah, that might make sense, but in many people's use cases, it might not. You pick your degree of abstraction. Like, that's fine. It will make a difference to, again, like exactly what people are getting paged on. And okay, so we'll talk about getting paged more in just a second, but I also should point out that like just reorganizing into two pizza teams is not going to necessarily make them have better conversations across team. Also, it's confusing because like, how big are the pizzas and how hungry are the teams? But anyway, yeah, we can talk about Conway's Law. I feel like people have talked about a little bit of this stuff. I would just say that like the communication piece is your secret sauce. Like that's how you make your organizations that are scaling work better. Brian Lyles talked in his talk yesterday about like your organization's scaling to like, he works at a bank and they're really big and they have thousands of developers. And yeah, not every single person is going to be at every single feature meeting, but that doesn't mean that you can't have communication across those teams. All right. The Vasa talk that Pete did made me very, very happy. And he's actually going to give it at DevOps Days Minneapolis, which makes me even happier. Because I love that lightning talk from 2014. And what this makes me think about, like the story of the Vasa has one piece that he mentioned in passing, that the shipwright died during construction. And I'm not sure if in this version of the talk he went into detail about the fact that the plans were actually all in his head, because that was the style at the time. And so like he literally dies and his wife and his buddy are trying to run the shipyard and trying to continue on his work. And because there was no documentation, they obviously had a lot of problems with the fact that everything had kind of changed in flight. And it reminds me that we have this culture of like, okay, we can patch this, we can get it working. There's definitely something on the 42-step checklist that's wrong, but we always skip step 17 and we do step 27 that way. And it's like I think every corporate wiki I've ever seen has something like that in it. And so that's why I don't think that like documentation is the solution. I think that being detailed at the moment of, say, committing the config, or at the moment of making the change in your source, like being detailed about your rationale then it's a gift to future you. Because like 6 months later, you're looking at the config and you're like, why the F did I do this? And like your commit message says, like change the value of X. And you're like, I can see that. I just don't know why. Like put Y in your commit messages. All right, so in a perfect world, this, by the way, is not photoshopped. For some reason, the license plate of this Super Jeep actually did say yay, which, All right, and you're wondering, like, what exactly is perfect? It looks like, the ice planet Hoth. And my spouse, Joe, and I just celebrated our 20th anniversary by going hiking in Iceland. And it was delightful, and it was pretty much perfect. And, Super Jeeps on glaciers. And also hiking on glaciers and melting glaciers, because that's also happening. But I remember thinking, like, there is an ideal. And the ideal of what we all want in our workplaces is, like, well-documented and easy to debug, and maybe not paging us in the middle of the night, and not horribly broken all the time. That would be super. And sometimes it feels like we're kind of far away from that ideal. And reaching back towards that is important. Because like, I feel like, okay, from the point of view of, if you're ops people, and you would really like your dev teams to, say, be on call with you. I can tell you that at Drama Fever, my last day was 4 days after our director of ops' last day, and the two of us had the most understanding of our artisanal homegrown platform, and which, by the way, like, if somebody builds like an artisanal homegrown platform out of Docker and Packer and Chef and Bodo on AWS, and like a bunch of janky bash, don't believe that there's no janky bash underlying all of it. There totally is. But when we're trying to onboard the wonderful, devs who we finally realized, hey, maybe we should get more people into the on-call rotation. Okay, let's give them on-call boot camp, because we're both heading out the door. By the way, don't wait until that crisis, and also maybe don't roll your own artisanal homegrown platform. This is our mid-roll, your plug for Cloud Foundry. It's open source. You should probably go check it out. You probably don't need to write all that logic yourself. But the idea of getting your devs on call, it does meet some resistance. But hey, in that perfect world, sure, everybody can be on call. It'll be great. But you can't just put people into your on-call rotation and be like, good luck, have fun. Because that's not going to work out well, and they're going to be really sad, and your outages will probably be worse and longer. And so, like, obviously building the automation that you need to build, decontextualizing the like deeply specific things that aren't really documentation, and being open enough to share across teams. And again, if you're thinking, oh, but everybody is just one big happy team. Okay, that's cool. Whatever your org structure says, that's not the actual realities inside your org. Like your org structure might say so-and-so reports wherever, but there will be people who will talk to each other. There will be people who will get information from each other in ways that may not be on paper somewhere. And like building that trust between teams so that they'll actually tell each other what's going on is super important. Okay, so that's like, my advice to ops people. But this does not let devs off the hook in terms of building things that are actually operable. So building for operability is kind of tough, right? Like you need to have the observability Charity was talking about. You need to have debuggability. What we were looking at with like tracing. You need to have the reality is what I'll call it, but it's really just stop assuming the happy path. Like I think in many ways people get excited about their idea and then they get it working and then they want to ship it and then they want to move on to the next thing, or maybe the PMs just want them to move on to the next thing because it works for some values of work. And I'm like, day one is really short, day two is forever. Like you really need to think about the ways that it will not work too, and not just how it maybe sort of worked this one time. All right. And like I've used this slide a million times. This is the classic wall of confusion. I think Andrew Clay Schaefer used this at Velocity in like 2009. And I do remix it to that, because if you separate your teams into people who are they're incentivized in different ways. And this is not me saying put everybody in one team. I'm just saying you have to align everyone's incentives. Because if you have teams that are partying because of the feature they shipped, while another team is like, preparing for their week of hell, like what Alice was describing to us in her talk yesterday, like it's going to be really hard to have good dynamics between those teams. It's also going to be really hard to have, realistic amounts of support for each other's, initiatives and ideas. Like this is kind of, human nature, is if somebody else is, hey, I shipped it, it's fine, it's done, it's #probably fine. If it ruins your weekend, you're going to be really against them ever doing that again. And whether or not you have the authority to stop them, it's like, this is actually, just yell it out. What animal do you see there? Exactly. Yeah, it's the rabbit/duck. Like it's one of those. There's a German philosopher from the 1950s is writing about this. This is a wood carving from like the late 19th century, because it's all about perspective, right? So I would say this is not that devs see things one way and ops see things another way, and so like one is right and one is wrong. I would say like we should, instead of saying, well, I'm on Team Rabbit and you're on Team Duck, and I hate you, be like, we're all on Team Rabbit Duck. Let's like try to look at things from each other's perspective. Okay, so all right, I feel like my laptop went to sleep and I don't want to sit here and unlock it, and I didn't start the timer anyway, so I assume I'm probably close to out of time. But a couple of just quick anecdotes from when I was on call. All right, the first time I was on call, it was a couple of exciting events like Y2K and the Salt Lake City Olympics in 2002. Y2K, we did not actually get paged because we fixed all the NTP and other issues, the previous summer. But the 2002 Olympics, we actually had the ops team just take shifts and stay up all night just in case. Because I guess it was I was working for Quest, and it was like a big deal as to whether or not, the network stayed stable. And so I remember getting a case of balls and like reading Usenet and playing The Sims all night just to stay up. And I mean, our server stayed up too. It's like they were Solaris boxes. They were pretty solid. Pour one out for sun. But like that's kind of, I think, a good example of just, hey, let's just throw some human misery at this problem, because that'll make it better. And then like the next time I was on call, it was at a small ISP, And most of the times we got paged, it really didn't have a lot to do with our systems. I mean, sometimes it did. We had a news server that like the hardware was melting down, but a lot of times it was the colo customers who like needed to go visit their servers on the weekend, usually after I'd already paid cover charge somewhere, which was, upsetting. And again, like we didn't really have other teams we could farm that out to because like those weren't really environments we were doing a lot of custom dev necessarily. Then I worked at a university, and the CERN talk we just had was like, oh, memory lane. Like we used a lot of that same stack. And the biggest difficulty there was most of our pages were environmental. And so you needed physical access to the data center to like go in and look at them, and then usually you had to call the building access people to have them come and like fix the water chilling that was leaking under the floor or whatever. And we did actually have developers who wanted to join that on-call rotation because they also wanted to run on the supercomputers. I didn't really trust them. I assumed it was probably for nefarious purposes. Like, they wanted to install the Git binary, and I was like, we have SVN, why do you need that? But like the point was that we actually had someone who wanted to help, and I said no, because, well, I was a BOFH, and also like super low trust. I didn't think that they would handle outages the way I wanted them to. And when I worked at the ad tech place that I talked about last time, I mean I was the only person with an ops role, so everyone was on call. Pretty much everyone was on call. Super high trust, variable ability. I still had a dev calling me at 4 a.m, when our HBase cluster got terminated by an EMR bug. That was good times. And then like the Drama Fever place, like we had, like variable abilities. So there were definitely people who could have been on call, but we didn't invest, as an ops team, we didn't invest in, at least until right before I left, we didn't invest in onboarding the people who could have joined the rotation. So it's like, it's a miss on our parts, but it's also like thinking about how you can level up the skills of other people around you. And at this point at Pivotal, I am not on call, but one of the things that's good about the way on call works at Pivotal is we do have ops teams in Dublin, San Francisco, and Beijing, so we can do a follow the sun thing and people don't have to be up in the middle of the night all the time. But another thing we do is have our escalations with like Datadog and PagerDuty set up so that the relevant teams are going to be the first to see an alert. If of course stuff is architected such, in many cases it is, architected such that the right person can be alerted, then you don't spend time having somebody act as a named pipe, a very angry named pipe, calling up the dev who could actually fix it. So that's where that's possible, I strongly recommend. And yeah, basically I think if you invest in your architecture and your observability and your culture such that you can split up on-call to put more people on call instead of fewer, and the more relevant people on call. And if you're thinking like, oh, but we're super regulated and like we have to have segregation of duties and all this stuff. I mean, like, yeah, you build that into your alerting logic so that people who can, through whatever the constraints of your org are, be on call are the ones who are on call. Okay, but yeah, this is Schaefer again, just saying, like, we keep talking about, containers, and we keep talking about all this stuff and, exactly how we deploy our code, but architecture and telemetry are what make a huge difference for being able to alert the right people who can actually solve the problem. Not just to be like, oh, now you're on call too and you get to be miserable, you're being punished. It's like, no, you just want it to go to the people who can actually solve it without it being a huge research project. So like I would say these implementations vary because it can vary based on like say, yeah, probably get you some cloud, get you some containers, get you some platforms. The implementation is something you can talk to a myriad of vendors or look at a myriad of open source projects for. But that, I think, makes a huge difference. And where am I on time? I'm sorry, I have no idea. I'm totally out of time. So I'm going to just say I have a lot of ridiculous slides. Wow, I can't actually go fast with this. That's weird. I have a lot of ridiculous slides that we don't need to talk about. I would say trying to have a good understanding of your environment and there's lots and lots of vendors here that can help you with that, is super important. Because you can't alert properly if you don't know what's going on. And the way we did used to do this, ludicrous. And the way we're doing it now, James Turnbull wrote a really good book, The Art of Monitoring, that you definitely want to go check out. It's available, like, I think it's artofmonitoring.com. So, and yeah, if we're collaborating, and we're gonna say, if there's a sign, this is in Australia, there's a sign about like bird attacks on this beach, try a different route next time. And I was like, okay, we're already here. This is kind of terrifying. But I would say, like, if your culture has like known problems, just be adaptable and be ready to have those things inside your organization that you already know about, just change them. So this basically, am I saying this? Like, computers are easy, people are hard? And it's like, no. I mean, that's obviously totally a lie, right? Like, it's way, way more complex than that. But we can solve this. Like, I know we can solve this. And this is an episode of our podcast that Pete Cheslock and Charity Majors were on. You should definitely go listen to. It was after the whole left pad thing. And they were talking about, owning your own availability. And it is easy to look at all these cliches and be like, oh yeah, we have metaphors that will like solve all of this for us. And it's like, yes, I mean, no, not really. These are all ways of thinking about it. But I think the important thing that I want to leave you with is we're not going to solve these problems by throwing human misery at them. Like, that doesn't scale, because imagine if you're super successful and now you're going to just have more and more miserable people? Like, that doesn't work. So instead of volunteering as tribute, like, volunteer to invest in your organization's operability and, your monitoring and your people. Like, if you invest in that, like, you'll be so much happier. So that's it. That's all. There should be a comma there.